I was sitting in a quiet cafe recently, watching a friend scroll through her phone. For nearly a year, she's been talking about a project she wants to start.
Oh, right. The classic project that's always just on the horizon.
Exactly. It's a career shift she's supposedly desperate for, but, her eyes were tired, her shoulders were hunched, and she just looked genuinely drained.
Yeah, carrying that kind of unresolved ambition around is exhausting.
It really is. Anyway, she eventually turned the screen toward me to show a post she'd just saved. It was this beautiful, minimalist graphic that read, "You are doing your best. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise."
I've seen a million of those.
Right. And as she read those words, I saw her entire body relax. The tension left her jaw, and she gave this slow, satisfied nod like she'd just received a gold medal or something.
Wow. Just from reading a quote.
Yeah. She whispered, "I really needed to hear that. I've been so hard on myself." But here was the really unsettling part. She hadn't actually taken a single step toward that new career.
Nothing at all.
Not a thing. She hadn't updated her resume, she hadn't researched the field, she hadn't sent a single email. To her, the sheer mental exhaustion of thinking about changing had become completely indistinguishable from the act of changing.
That is such a dangerous place to be.
It is. That social media post didn't give her the strength to move, it gave her the permission to stay exactly where she was. Watching her, I realized how chillingly easy it is to mistake a sedative for medicine.
A sedative for medicine. That's a really powerful way to put it.
Well, we live in an era where professional comfort is dispensed to millions at the click of a button, right? But there's a fundamental glitch in the system. The exact same sentence that saves one person's life can quietly sabotage another's future.
Because context is everything.
Exactly. It's not that the message is wrong. It's that the person receiving it is often in a completely different stage than the message intends.
Right. The psychological stage changes the entire function of the words.
Yeah. There is a specific invisible threshold where being kind to yourself stops being a path to recovery and starts becoming a cage. So the question we're looking at today is, if you saw that post today, would it help you get back on your feet?
Or would it just make it more comfortable to stay on your knees?
Exactly. That's what we are getting into with this deep dive.
And to really unpack that, we have to dissect this invisible psychological threshold between intention and action. We need to look at how modern comfort structures, from digital algorithms to actual therapy settings, often paralyze the exact people they want to help.
Because it's not malicious, right? These systems want to help.
But when human beings face daunting obstacles, they generally fall into one of three distinct stages. The first stage is what we can call on the ground.
On the ground, like total psychological collapse.
Exactly. A person in this state is crushed by total self-blame and this pervasive sense of personal failure. Their environment, their circumstances, other people's roles in their hardship, all of that is completely invisible to them.
So they just internalize all of the blame.
100%. The gravity of this situation is pointed entirely inward. They have almost no capacity to envision a future because their present reality is just consumed by the belief that they are fundamentally broken.
So for someone in that stage, a message like "you are doing your best" is actually crucial.
Oh, it's a critical intervention. It acts as a necessary tourniquet that stops the bleeding of profound self-hatred. It is literally designed to keep them alive.
Right, because when you are entirely flattened by life, any demand for action just feels like another weight pressing you further into the dirt.
Yeah, you don't need a 5-step strategy when you are on the ground. You just need to remember how to breathe. You need baseline stabilization.
So what's the other extreme?
On the complete opposite end of the spectrum is the third stage, which we call standing. A person who is standing is acting on their own judgment. They aren't perfect, and they still face immense friction and difficulty, obviously.
But they're moving.
Right, they're moving under their own weight. They can look at a problem, experience the anxiety associated with it, and still initiate action. They take responsibility for missteps and advance.
And if you offer blanket comfort to someone who is standing?
I mean, they might appreciate it, but it doesn't fundamentally alter their trajectory. They already have internal momentum. The profound danger, and really the primary focus of our deep dive today, lies in the middle stage.
The middle stage, the space between.
Yes. This is the stage we define as on one knee.
On one knee, the transitional zone.
Exactly. A person on one knee desires movement. The intention to try is genuinely felt. The pain of their current situation is acute, and they desperately want to change it.
But they're stuck.
Completely paralyzed. And critically, in this state, the sheer intention to try is repeatedly, tragically mistaken for actual effort. They confuse the emotional exhaustion of wanting things to be different with the physical and cognitive labor of actually making them different.
Oh, so wanting to change feels like doing the work of changing.
Yes. And we are going to deconstruct the precise mechanics of this paralysis because it is probably the most misunderstood psychological state in modern society. When you are on one knee, you are uniquely vulnerable to interventions that feel good but act as behavioral poison.
Okay, let's ground this in a specific reality. Let's picture Maya. She's in a dimly lit apartment in Brooklyn.
Okay.
The only real light source is the harsh blue-white glow of her smartphone screen reflecting off her face. Her thumb is just rhythmically swiping through a sea of pastel-colored infographics.
The classic doom scroll, but make it aesthetic.
Exactly. And she pauses on these phrases drifting across her feed. Stuff like, "You don't owe anyone productivity," declared in this soft, looping font. Or, "Your rest is radical," set against an illustration of a setting sun.
Very common on social media right now.
Right. And Maya is firmly in this on-one-knee state. Let's look at her actual life. Her rent is 2 weeks overdue. There's a crucial freelance project sitting on her desk, and the files haven't been opened in 3 weeks.
And she's completely aware of this, right? She's not oblivious.
Every time she looks at the desk, this clawing physical anxiety rises in her throat. Her heart rate spikes. Her chest tightens. It is a biological warning system screaming at her about impending consequences.
And we have to pay attention to what happens in that exact moment of biological panic. That spike in autonomic arousal is intensely uncomfortable.
It's unbearable. So what does she do? She turns back to the screen. And the digital algorithm, which has tracked her hesitation and her anxiety, offers a soothing balm of blanket encouragement.
It feeds her exactly what she wants to hear.
Exactly. It shows her an image that says, "Forgive yourself for the things you didn't accomplish today." It functions quite literally as a digital narcotic.
Yes, because as we establish, these messages are fundamentally designed to rescue those on the ground. But for Maya, who is on one knee, they are calcifying her paralysis.
She harbors this profound secret guilt, right? Because deep down she knows she doesn't actually feel healed by this positivity. She knows the rent is still due.
But the intention-behavior gap widens with every double tap, every bookmark.
Exactly. Social media provides her with a sophisticated, socially acceptable vocabulary to justify her stagnation. It turns her genuine desire to change into a hollow performance of self-care.
All while the foundation of her actual life erodes in the background. The psychology operating here highlights the exact danger we are exploring. When someone consumes messages designed to prevent suicidal self-hatred while they are merely stuck in a state of hesitation.
It's like applying a psychological tourniquet to a paper cut.
It halts all circulation. It validates the stagnation. To really understand the mechanism here, we have to completely reevaluate the psychology of procrastination.
Yeah, because society frequently mischaracterizes procrastination, right?
We constantly treat it as a failure of time management. We act like it's a symptom of inherent laziness or a lack of moral fiber. We tell people they just need a better calendar system, a new app, or more discipline.
Right. Just buy a new planner and you'll be fine.
Exactly. But neurologically and psychologically, procrastination has almost nothing to do with time management. It is fundamentally an emotional regulation issue.
Yeah, procrastination isn't a time management failure. Because if I have a report due on Friday and I wait until Thursday midnight to start it, everyone, myself included, would say, I mismanaged my time. You are saying that entirely misses what my brain is actually doing.
It completely misses the mechanism. Procrastination functions as a short-term mood repair strategy.
Mood repair.
Yes. Let's look at Maya's freelance project.
Right.
The project itself, the act of opening the files, reading the brief, typing words, is not physically impossible for her. Her fingers work. Her eyes work.
Right.
But when she thinks about the task, it triggers deeply unpleasant emotions. Anxiety about her financial instability, overwhelm at the sheer volume of work, and most potently, a fear of failure.
Like, what if she does the work and it isn't good enough?
So the task transforms from a neutral set of actions into an active emotional threat.
So the brain perceives the unopened file on her laptop the same way it would perceive a physical threat in the room. It's an immediate stressor.
The amygdala registers a threat. The individual is faced with negative affect, a bad mood, intense anxiety, self-doubt. The brain's immediate primitive objective becomes alleviating that negative state.
Get rid of the bad feeling as fast as possible.
Yes. Shifting attention away from the aversive task and toward comforting content, like those pastel infographics on her phone, provides an immediate positive hedonic shift. It relieves the anxiety temporarily.
So the brain learns that avoiding the task successfully regulates the negative emotion.
You aren't managing your time poorly. You're managing your mood highly effectively in the short term, but disastrously in the long term.
The brain is actively avoiding the task, not because the task itself is demanding, but because the emotions attached to the task are deeply uncomfortable. I want to emphasize this because it changes everything about how we view our own inaction.
Because the avoidance is a misguided self-defense mechanism.
Yeah.
And this dynamic relies on a powerful cognitive bias known as time inconsistency, which operates in tandem with a concept called temporal discounting. Human beings have a natural, deeply ingrained evolutionary tendency to value immediate rewards far more highly than future rewards, even when the future reward is objectively significantly more valuable.
This is essentially my brain deciding that the pain of dealing with a problem today is infinitely worse than the massive penalty fee I will get next month. Because in a weird psychological way, future me isn't my problem. Future me is almost treated like a stranger by my brain.
That is exactly how the brain processes it. Functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI scans, show that when people think about their future selves, the neural network activated is the same network used when thinking about strangers. The present self prioritizes the immediate relief of avoiding discomfort. The present self wants the positive hedonic shift right now. The future self is left to deal with the objective consequences.
The missed deadline, the angry client, the unpaid rent.
In the one-knee state, the individual fully intends to complete the task. Maya desperately wants to finish the project. Her future self is entirely committed to the goal.
But the present self continuously, repeatedly chooses the immediate emotional relief provided by the digital narcotic.
The friction of actually starting the task, sitting with the anxiety, pushing through the initial incompetence, all of that is bypassed in favor of instant mood repair.
You know, it is entirely comparable to eating a massive amount of junk food while deeply engrossed in reading a fitness magazine. Right. The brain receives this immediate sensory satisfaction of engaging with the concept of health. You feel like you're participating in the culture of wellness. You're looking at the meal plans, reading the workout routines, absorbing the aesthetic of fitness.
You get a dopamine hit just from the association.
Exactly. But you are completely bypassing the physical friction, the sweat, and the exertion of an actual workout. The question becomes, how does the mere desire to do something morph so seamlessly into the physiological feeling of actually doing it?
It's a fascinating and insidious mechanism. Stating an intention, whether it is stated internally to yourself, spoken aloud to a friend, or broadcast through the curation of a digital persona, actively hijacks the brain's reward system.
Okay, so how does Maya's engagement with the aesthetic of healing satisfy her biological drive to actually heal her life?
To understand why this happens, we have to look at the mechanics of self-completion theory.
Self-completion theory. Walk us through how this operates when someone is stuck on one knee.
The theory posits that when individuals commit to an identity goal, they feel a deep psychological need to prove to themselves and others that they possess this identity.
An identity goal could be anything, right?
Yes, becoming a successful professional, a compassionate parent, a competent artist, or in Maya's case, a healed individual navigating their mental health. To solidify this identity, the individual must accumulate what we call identity symbols.
Identity symbols, like the markers that signal to the tribe who you are.
Exactly. Identity symbols can be tangible, like a university diploma, a specific style of dress, or professional credentials.
Okay.
They can also be specific behaviors, like meditating daily or writing code. However, behavioral intentions themselves act as highly potent, highly deceptive identity symbols.
So just planning to do something counts as a symbol.
The mere stated plan to do something is registered by the brain as a symbol of the identity.
Oh, wow. So when Maya saves a quote about radical rest or shares a post about setting boundaries, she isn't just mindlessly clicking.
No, she is actively acquiring an identity symbol.
She is putting a badge on her digital uniform that signifies she is a person actively on a healing journey.
That is precisely what she is doing. The digital environment is validating her identity as a recovering person simply because she signals the intention to recover. The aesthetic of healing becomes a substitute for the labor of healing.
This is terrifying because it means the brain cannot differentiate between the intention to act and the action itself, provided the intention gets enough validation.
Yes. It moves beyond a quirk of social media into measurable, predictive behavioral science.
So what does the empirical reality look like? What happens when we publicize our intentions?
The behavioral reality is striking and often counterintuitive. When other people take notice of your identity-relevant behavioral intentions, the actual performance of the intended behaviors is severely compromised.
So telling people my goals actually hurts my chances of doing them.
Yes. Social recognition of an intention engenders a premature sense of completeness.
Premature completeness, meaning the brain essentially checks the box before the work is done.
Exactly. The gap between intention and behavior widens drastically because the brain registers the social validation as actual goal attainment. You receive the psychological reward without having to expend the effort.
I want to make sure everyone hears this because this challenges almost everything modern self-help tells us. We are constantly told to declare our goals, to build accountability, to post our journey online so our community can cheer us on.
It's common advice, but it's fundamentally flawed for many people.
You are saying that doing this is biologically designed to destroy our follow-through. What does the research actually look like on this?
Let's consider the observational data regarding public intentions in highly competitive fields. In one study, law students, individuals who were highly driven and committed to a rigorous identity goal, were asked to state their intention to utilize educational opportunities.
So they had to say exactly what they intended to do to study and prepare to be successful jurists.
Right. For one group, this intention was made public. It was explicitly acknowledged by an observer. For the other group, their intentions remained completely private.
And let me guess, the group that announced their plans to the observer studied harder because they felt accountable.
The law students whose intentions were publicly recognized spent significantly less time actually studying the provided legal cases compared to the students whose intentions remained completely private.
Because they already felt like they were hardworking law students just by stating it.
Exactly. When they felt their identity as a hardworking law student was validated by the observer, their internal drive to perform the difficult, tedious work of studying plummeted. And a parallel phenomenon occurred in studies involving aspiring clinical psychologists. These were students learning therapeutic techniques.
Okay.
When their intention to study and analyze therapy video sessions was publicly recognized, they spent markedly less time actually watching and analyzing the difficult material.
The social acknowledgement gave them the identity symbol they craved.
Right, prematurely completing the psychological loop.
This connects perfectly back to Maya. By engaging with a curated aesthetic of self-care and projecting that intention to her digital environment, she is accumulating public identity symbols at an incredible rate.
She's getting all the validation without doing the work.
The likes from her friends, the shares, the visual alignment with the concept of healing, it all provides a massive dose of premature completeness. The digital environment tells her she has successfully achieved the identity of someone taking care of themselves.
Yes, and this premature completeness actively, chemically destroys her biological drive to execute the actual work.
The friction required to change her life, the terrifying act of opening the freelance file, confronting the client, looking at her bank account, that friction is neutralized.
It's neutralized by the empty satisfaction of having her intention validated. The intention itself becomes the substitute activity. It satisfies the psychological need to strive toward the goal without demanding the physical or cognitive labor of achieving it.
This is why the one-knee state is so insidious, so dangerous. The individual feels the satisfaction of movement without ever leaving their current physical or circumstantial position.
The gap between what they intend to do and what they actually do becomes a canyon, but they are blind to it because they feel emotionally fulfilled by the performance of the intention.
You know, this paralysis isn't confined to people scrolling on their phones in the dark. It isn't just a symptom of algorithm-driven social media. What blew my mind in looking at this phenomenon is that this exact same paralysis infiltrates the environments specifically designed to cure it.
Absolutely. The clinical setting is highly susceptible to this.
It happens in the very rooms where people go to get unstuck. Let's shift the environment from Maya's apartment to a professional setting. Let's imagine a therapy office in London.
Okay.
This is Dr. Aris. He sits in his leather chair, the heavy radiator in the corner humming a low, uneven tune that perfectly matches his internal unrest. His client, Leo, sits across from him.
Leo is the perfect patient, I assume.
By all traditional clinical measures, Leo is a perfect patient. For 6 straight months, Leo has arrived exactly on time. He uses precise therapeutic vocabulary.
Let me guess, he talks about his attachment styles.
Yes. His attachment styles, his triggers, his avoidant tendencies. He nods insightfully at every breakthrough Aris guides him toward. They have deeply explored Leo's childhood, his fears, and his hopes.
But outside the office,
Outside the four walls of that office, Leo's life remains a frozen landscape. He hasn't sent a single job application, he hasn't updated his resume, he hasn't reached out to his estranged brother.
Complete paralysis.
Despite his stated desperate desire to find work and rebuild his life. And Dr. Eris is experiencing this creeping sense of professional shame. It's an imposter syndrome fueled by Leo's own performative progress.
Because Eris realizes he's fallen into a trap.
Actually, he realizes with a sinking feeling in his stomach that he has been treating Leo as if Leo were on the ground. Eris has been providing endless comfort, unending empathy for a pervasive self-blame that Leo doesn't actually feel.
Right, because Leo is firmly on one knee.
And tragically, Leo is using the therapy sessions themselves as a sophisticated, highly intellectualized form of procrastination.
The tragedy wasn't a lack of insight. Leo has plenty of insight.
The tragedy was that Eris's professional empathy had become the very cushion Leo used to avoid the hard, cold floor of action. It had become a sterile, closed loop. Talk, validate, remain.
What Dr. Eris experienced is incredibly common. Mental health professionals frequently struggle to identify clients trapped in this specific intention-action gap. Eris misdiagnosed the paralysis.
He treated hesitation like it was total collapse.
Yes. He observed Leo's hesitation, heard his expressions of anxiety, and applied interventions designed for someone crushed by fatalistic self-hatred. When a patient is truly on the ground, empathy, validation, and the deliberate alleviation of guilt are vital first steps.
To prevent total psychological collapse, you have to remove the pressure.
But Leo was not on the ground. He possessed genuine desire, clear intentions, and the cognitive capacity to understand his situation.
So for Leo, the therapy session wasn't a place of healing. It was a place of identity symbol acquisition.
In the one-knee state, therapy itself can mutate into the ultimate substitute activity. The patient shows up, articulates their desire to change, expresses the anxiety holding them back, and receives deep professional validation for that desire.
But the therapeutic intervention is completely misapplied.
Yes. Reassuring someone who is already partially up, validating the anxiety of someone who needs to move, removes the necessary friction required to stand.
It creates this highly comfortable equilibrium where the intention to find a job is repeatedly discussed, intellectualized, and validated, substituting entirely for the aversive, risky task of actually applying for one. But I have to push back here, or at least ask the obvious question. If total comfort and endless validation serve as a trap for someone on one knee, why can't the therapist simply shift gears?
You mean shift to tough love?
Yeah. Why can't Eris look at Leo, recognize he is using therapy to procrastinate, and just demand that Leo handle it himself, effectively treating him like someone who is standing?
No more talking about your childhood until you bring me a submitted job application.
Just tell him to do it.
It is a logical question. But applying the standing response to someone on one knee guarantees failure. It triggers an immediate collapse.
Really? Why?
If you demand that someone in the one knee state simply push through the friction and handle it themselves, if you employ harsh, tough love, they will shatter and fall completely back to the ground.
But if they aren't completely broken, why can't they just push through?
Because they lack the necessary emotional regulation resources to process the friction of the aversive task without spiraling into a profound sense of failure.
Oh, because procrastination is an emotion regulation problem.
Exactly. When you force them into the task without addressing the underlying emotional deficit, the anxiety overwhelms the system. The intervention must target the precise mechanism of the paralysis.
It can't just be blanket comfort or harsh demands.
Right. It cannot rely on blanket comfort, which validates the stagnation, nor can it rely on harsh demands for immediate action, which overwhelms the nervous system.
The inability to just push through implies a systemic deficit. It is not a matter of willpower, which is a word we throw around entirely too much. It is a matter of available mental bandwidth. There's a reason they don't have the resources.
Yes, and that deficit is rigorously defined by the stress context vulnerability model. We must understand exactly why the individual lacks these emotional regulation resources at this specific moment in their life.
So what does the model tell us?
The model explains how high-stress contexts, which can range from acute financial insecurity to broad societal disruption, prolonged social isolation, or chronic interpersonal conflict, create a permanent backdrop of sustained negative emotions.
It's always there in the background.
The individual is not just dealing with the stress of the immediate task. They are forced to constantly invisibly manage this ambient stress in the background.
Ambient stress. It's like the hum of the refrigerator you don't realize you're hearing until the power goes out, but your brain is constantly processing it.
And constantly processing that ambient stress leads to a state called coping depletion. The ongoing chronic stress rapidly depletes the physiological and psychological resources required to manage even minor negative states.
Because the cognitive resources are simply spent keeping the baseline intact.
Yeah.
It is entirely analogous to a smartphone running a heavy, complex background update. Imagine your phone is downloading a massive operating system update in the background. You don't see it happening on the screen, but the processor is working at maximum capacity.
Right. The phone feels warm, the battery is draining.
Exactly. Then you attempt to open a simple everyday app. You just want to send a basic email or open a note to update a single line on a resume, and the phone completely freezes. It stutters, the screen goes unresponsive, and it crashes.
The app isn't the problem.
No, the email app is incredibly light. The problem is that the system's RAM, its working memory, is completely devoured by the invisible background stress of the update.
That analogy is an accurate functional representation of what we call phenotypic vulnerability.
So procrastination in this state is the brain force quitting the app to prevent a total system crash.
Exactly. The brain recognizes that it lacks the operational memory to handle the minor anxiety of writing the email, because all available memory, all emotional regulation bandwidth, is dedicated to keeping the individual afloat amidst chronic stress.
Wow.
As stress accumulates in the background, the unpaid rent, the societal pressure, the isolation, the individual's threshold for tolerating aversive tasks drops significantly. Their baseline vulnerability increases.
So a minor task feels impossible.
A task that would normally cause mild annoyance or temporary boredom like formatting a resume or reading a brief now triggers intense, disproportionate emotional overwhelm. Because the coping resources are depleted, the individual utilizes avoidance, which presents as procrastination, as a low-resource method of managing the immediate negative emotion.
It is the cheapest, fastest way to relieve the system pressure.
However, this strategy inevitably tragically backfires. While avoiding the task provides immediate relief, the task does not disappear. Ruminative thinking about the delayed task reactivates the stress response.
So they're worrying about the email they haven't sent. They obsess over the job they haven't applied for.
And this rumination generates more anxiety, which further depletes their already low resources. It creates a vicious, self-sustaining cycle where the avoided task mutates into a chronic stressor itself.
The very act of avoiding the work continuously drains the exact cognitive and emotional resources needed to complete it. So the avoidance becomes a new background update. It just eats more and more RAM until the person is entirely paralyzed, unable to even think about moving without feeling a sense of dread.
Exactly.
If comfort is a trek and tough love causes a collapse and their system is entirely depleted of resources, how does someone actually break this loop? How does a person transition from the paralysis of one knee to the momentum of standing? Let's look at how this shift actually happens in the real world.
It's a crucial shift.
Let's introduce Julian. Julian stood in the harsh fluorescent glare of a late-night laundromat. The air smelled of cheap detergent and damp cotton. He was staring down into a plastic laundry basket at a ruined silk shirt he'd just washed on the wrong cycle.
A very relatable, frustrating moment.
The fabric was warped and destroyed. Now, Julian's history is important here. For years, Julian had been firmly on the ground. He had drowned in the belief that he was fundamentally broken, incompetent, and incapable of executing basic adult tasks.
So this ruined shirt is a massive trigger.
If this laundry incident had happened 3 years ago, he would have collapsed onto the folding table, wept, and used it as proof that he was a failure who didn't deserve nice things.
Because that's the on-the-ground mentality.
But his transition to standing didn't come from a sudden burst of magical confidence. It didn't come from someone telling him he was doing his best. It came from a painful, highly clinical shift in his internal dialogue.
What did he change?
He remembered the turning point in his therapy. It was the moment he stopped saying, "I am a failure who ruins everything," and instead stared at the ruined shirt and stated the cold, unpoetic, objective reality. "I ruined this shirt because I didn't read the label."
That is a massive shift.
It sounds minor, right? But it was a tectonic shift. It meant trading the dramatic, heavy cloak of pathological self-blame for the sharp, stinging needle of productive self-assessment.
He took ownership of the specific action.
Standing up meant accepting that he wasn't a tragic figure in a grand drama destined to fail. He was just a capable man who made a mechanical error because he didn't pay attention to the details. He traded the grand narrative for a localized fact.
Julian's turning point perfectly, vividly illustrates the vital psychological distinction between characterological self-blame and behavioral self-blame.
Break down the difference between those two types of blame. Because usually when we hear the word blame, we assume it's always negative, always destructive.
Let's start with characterological self-blame. This type of blame is directed at stable, unchangeable, inherent aspects of one's personality. It is the deeply held belief that I am the type of person who fails, or I am fundamentally flawed, or I am lazy.
It's about who you are at your core.
The defining feature of characterological self-blame is its fatalism. If the cause of your failure is embedded in your very character, there's nothing you can do to change it.
It's out of your hands.
Exactly. This leads directly to poor psychosocial adjustment, profound loss of self-esteem, and severe depression. It belongs entirely to the on-the-ground state, where the individual perceives zero control over their future because their very nature is the immovable cause of their suffering.
Julian traded that heavy, fatalistic sentence for a very different kind of pain.
He transitioned to behavioral self-blame. This type of blame is directed strictly at specific, modifiable past behaviors. I did not read the label. I did not set an alarm. I did not outline the project before starting.
It's about what you did, not who you are.
While it is still a form of blame, and it still carries the sting of responsibility and regret, it is highly powerfully adaptive.
Why? Because it's fixable.
Because it relies on internal causes that are controllable and changeable. Research examining populations dealing with severe trauma, such as individuals recovering from major accidents or survivors of assault, reveals a highly counterintuitive but vital finding regarding self-blame. When individuals attribute their circumstances or their recovery hurdles to modifiable behaviors rather than inherent character flaws, they are engaging in what psychologists call a control maintenance strategy.
So by saying, I did this specific thing wrong, they are asserting that their actions actually matter.
Yes. And if their actions matter, it inherently means their future actions can yield entirely different results.
There is a profound, almost beautiful paradox here. Taking more targeted, specific responsibility actually cures the feeling of helplessness.
Yes.
When we are on one knee, we often run from blame because we think any blame will destroy us. But characterological blame acts as a life sentence. You believe you are broken, therefore you will always fail, so why try?
Right.
Behavioral blame, on the other hand, is merely a traffic ticket. You made a specific error, you pay the fine, you acknowledge the mistake, and you drive differently the next time you get in the car. It hurts your wallet, it hurts your ego, but it doesn't ground you.
Behavioral self-blame dramatically enhances the perception of future control. This is the exact mechanical force that pulls a person from one knee to standing.
It gives them their agency back.
It effectively neutralizes the intention-behavior gap we discussed earlier. The individual stops viewing their mistakes, their procrastination, or their paralysis as permanent identity flaws. Instead, they begin viewing these events as neutral data points for future action.
If the failure is tied to a specific behavior, the solution is tied to a specific behavior.
Exactly. The focus shifts entirely away from trying to regulate the painful global emotion of being a failure and shifts toward modifying the localized action that caused the error.
And when that happens, the desperate need for the digital narcotic or the validating therapeutic loop dissolves.
It dissolves because the individual regains agency over their immediate, tangible choices. They no longer need to be told they are doing their best because they are capable of analyzing what they did wrong and deciding to do better. The invisible architecture of paralysis is built on well-intentioned misunderstandings. The journey from the ground to one knee to standing requires actively rejecting the sedatives of premature social validation. It demands understanding that our hesitation, our procrastination, isn't a moral failing, but a biological mechanism of mood regulation that has been overloaded by stress.
We have to recognize when the pursuit of comfort transforms into the avoidance of life.
We have to learn to differentiate between the soothing messages that keep us breathing and the sharp truths that get us walking.
Words of blanket comfort will always be waiting. You can always open your phone, scroll for 10 seconds, and find a beautifully designed post telling you that your stagnation is actually a form of deep rest. Well-meaning friends will always be ready to tell you that it's okay to wait until you are fully ready. But true momentum requires stepping out of that warm, sterile loop of merely wanting to change. It requires trading the grand, tragic, almost romantic narrative of being a broken person for the cold, exhausting, yet liberating reality of being a capable person who simply needs to do the work. The roughness of reality may be exhausting, the friction of taking responsibility for your actions might sting your ego, but the weight of one's own feet on the pavement will always be more real and ultimately more freeing than the weight of the world on one's back.